This is Raptor. It's been a while. To those who reached out concerned, don't worry, I'm fine. Here, not dead. Just been busy with life. Hope to be making more videos soon. Well, beginning with this one, which, surprise, surprise, is at the crossroads of my biggest hyperfixations, obsessions, whatever you wish to call them, and how people don't realize how interconnected they've been from the very beginning. So I hope you guys enjoy. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. All right. So, hello audience. I'm Raptor, and here I am with Dr. Thomas Holtz, one of the world's leading researchers on Tyrannosaurids, my professor, and a childhood hero of mine.
Ah.
So, thank you for coming on the channel.
Sure.
And so, ever since The Empire Strikes Back, there have been real animals in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
We see iguanas, reticulated pythons, king snakes, etc. on Dagobah. But even before that, in the first film, there was the prop skeleton of the Krayt Dragon.
Right.
Which was, in fact, a reused sauropod skeleton from another film. Disney's One of Our Dinosaurs is Missing.
That's right.
Albeit not a particularly accurate one.
Well, you know, the skull was largely imaginary, but at the time, Brontosaurus and Apatosaurus weren't known for good skull material. And so what they have on the model from One of Our Dinosaurs is Missing was comparable to what you would see in a natural history museum, which is, sadly, it was mostly imaginary. We subsequently have recognized what actual Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus skulls were. So the skull isn't really good, but the stuff behind the neck, behind the head, is actually pretty good, and especially the parts that you see in Star Wars, because you don't see the limbs, you don't see the shoulder blades or the hips or anything, but you see the neck and then the torso extending out over a dune, and there are actually particular attributes of those vertebrae.
If you want to
yeah, there we go. So, which are distinctive to the sauropod dinosaurs, and not merely sauropod dinosaurs, but apatosaurians and their relatives, like the neural spines, the projections that come off of our vertebrae. In most animals, there's a single spine coming up, but in Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus and Diplodocus and many of their cousins, they're split, they're bifurcated. And you can actually see that to a certain degree in the neck, and especially when you get back towards the torso of the skeleton. It's definitely present there. So the original model from the Disney movie was actually not terribly bad, and that carries over into Star Wars. But of course, you only see its skeleton, and that makes sense because it's Tatooine, and there's not a lot of plants for a giant plant eater to eat. So it's not a surprise it's dead and bleached as a skeleton. Although there is another, not an appearance, but another attribute of Krayt dragons that shows up in Star Wars. And that is, according to the novel, the sound that Obi-Wan makes to scare off the Sand People is supposedly the howl of a Krayt dragon. That was actually its first mention in the original novel and like the original magazines that came out.
So like Alan Dean Foster's like novelization.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
And I think actually in the original script, because I think it made it into the Marvel comics, and the comics were based off the original shooting script. He refers to the howl of a Krayt dragon. And no one knew what a Krayt dragon was, and we weren't even certain that the skeleton that we saw on Tatooine was a Krayt dragon skeleton. Subsequently, they said, okay, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So we know what that brontosaur the sound it would have generated, at least in the Star Wars universe. It's that sound that Obi-Wan somehow generates. So
somehow,
yes.
And then for some reason in some later edition, they change it to make it sound more like the Varactyl from Episode 3. But...
Oh, that's right, yeah. Yeah.
One of the many odd choices in changes.
Yeah, exactly. Trivial changes that serve no purpose other than to change.
Right. Well, the funny thing as well, though, I don't believe in all the depictions of Krayt dragons, be they in Star Wars Legends or the new canon. I don't think any of them actually match the anatomy portrayed there. And I mean, even they make them, I suppose, cross them with like a centipede or something because they've got a bajillion legs. But regardless.
Yeah. That it started as a sauropod.
Yeah. So yeah, going onwards, continuing on sauropods.
Right.
There was from the Clone Wars animated series, the Umbaran Starfighter.
Right. So this weird looking starfighter that shows up, and it's got, you know, lots of the Star Wars fighters have weird projections coming off of them, and this particular one turns out to be inspired by the posterior cervicals, that is the neck towards the back of the neck rather than the front of the neck, of apatosaurine sauropods, so Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus, which have these loops, these rings in their connecting parts of their neck bones, which many other forms don't have. It's been suggested that this helps reinforce the necks in Apatosaurus and Brontosaurus and their closest relatives, so they might be able to use it in neck-to-neck combat. Now, we don't have any good, strong, positive evidence of that, but this supports this idea. Sort of like the way giraffes fight neck-to-neck in the modern world.
Right. Interesting, convergences in both of the super long-necked tetrapod groups.
And most other sauropods have much more slender, gracile necks, but Apatosaurians have this more brutal, heavy neck with this structure in it, and that's what inspired, I guess, the model makers.
Yeah, no, because I mean, it's so fascinating how there can be sometimes it's everyday objects, like in the case of the Millennium Falcon was a hamburger with an olive on the side,
right?
And unless I'm 99% sure the Republic gunship is based like on a paper clip and whatever.
Oh, okay,
but yeah, there's it's to any artists out there, look at different sources of inspirations. As obscure as something like this, it can lead to very unique stuff. I mean, that's probably the most unique stuff.
Exactly, very distinctive. It doesn't look like other starfighters that you've seen before in other shows, so it gives it something that's very special. And artists of all sorts are inspired by things they find out there in nature or in our mundane things, or maybe even just the particular pattern of light hitting the wall a certain way. So artists are always looking out for new inspiration, and this person or this team, whichever it was inspired by the cervical vertebrae of Apatosaurian sauropods, which is cool.
Right. Yeah. Well, and unless I'm mistaken, I believe at one point you pointed out from another show, wasn't there a ceratopsian?
Right. So in the 1990s science fiction TV series Babylon 5, which is one of the first TV series that all of its special effects were done on computer. There is the starship of an extraordinarily advanced society, vastly superior to even at this point, star-traveling humans and so forth. And the shape of their ship, or elements of their ship, were actually taken as from ceratopsian, in fact, Triceratops skulls, and then rotated around an axis to make it sort of a radial structure rather than a bilateral structure. And so they were also inspired by nature, and then took it and warped it into something that's very distinctive looking. And additionally, that's the weird shape. And again, with these fighters, suggesting that the creators of them, don't necessarily think like us, that they think that their art and their technology has gone in some very different direction than we have, because it doesn't look like the more, quote unquote, traditional looking ships, like say an X-Wing or something, that are designed primarily by humans or their equivalents. So,
right. Yeah. Well, again, remaining on sauropods, it appears that the Ronto from
Mm-hmm.
the special edition of A New Hope was created using ILM's 3D model of the Brachiosaurus from Jurassic Park as its basis.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently the animators referred to it as the Bronto, and George Lucas came along, dropped the B, and that's where the name came from.
Right. And yeah, you could certainly see, it's got some brachiosaur-like elements to it, and it's not a surprise. A lot of times, studios will repurpose some of their old effects. Back in the day, Toho Studios, when they were still doing suitmation, so people in rubber suits, would remodel the suits from one kaiju to the next, and later on, with digital assets. If someone's already gone to all the work to do the equivalent to armature to them for the locomotion and so forth, and the skins, well, you could tweak the proportions, modify the skins somewhat, add something here, subtract something there, and produce something that is still useful, and you don't have to recreate it entirely from scratch.
Yeah, especially this being in the early days of 3D animation. It's there's despite some more mammalian features, you can still see the core is very much Brachiosaurus.
Exactly,
the barrel chest, the longer forelimbs.
Yes.
Actually, even now that I look at it, it's kind of like, Paraceratherium.
Right. So the face definitely is not so dinosaurian. It does look like our interpretations of the hornless rhino Paraceratherium, which has another place in Star Wars inspiration. Of course, and those are the original Imperial walkers we see, the AT-ATs on Hoth. And Phil Tippett, the animator, one of the chief animators for ILM during all this, of course, also famously the dinosaur supervisor of Jurassic Park.
I will insert the meme here.
Exactly. And even before that, Phil Tippett had done some of the best stop motion, or rather go motion, as he called it, is innovation to that technique. Work on dinosaurs in the 80s. He obviously knew his fossil animals, and so to create some weird-looking, literally quadrupedal, so a four-legged walking piece of artillery was inspired by these giant hornless rhinos from the mid-Cenozoic. So, it's not a dinosaur. It doesn't have a long neck. It doesn't have a long tail. It's got a more compact body. And it looks really impressive. Of course, AT-ATs are vastly taller than any hornless rhino, or indeed any terrestrial animal could ever be on Earth. But it's made of technology, and it's Star Wars. They can get away with that.
Fantastic point. It's great that you point that out. That was actually later in my script. But yeah, no, there was a lot of speculation for some time that they were based on these harbor shipping cranes in the San Francisco Bay Area. But no, he himself said it was, I guess at the time it would have been called Baluchitherium.
Right.
But I guess since it's been lumped as Paracera.
Exactly. So there's bits and pieces of these giant rhinos have been found throughout the early 20th century. Baluchitherium and Indricotherium and Paraceratherium.
Pakistan, right?
Yeah. And so eventually people surveyed all of them and recognized there's probably just one genus with maybe a couple species. So Paraceratherium has priority. That is to say, it's the oldest properly named one, so we use that name now. But yeah, and in fact, our modern interpretation would have slightly different proportions, sort of neckier than the inspiration for the AT-AT. But if you look at the art that Phil Tippett would have grown up with in, say the 50s and 60s, in paleontology books, Charles Knight paintings, and other line drawings in paleontology books and popular books, would have looked a lot like the proportions you see in the AT-AT.
Right. So, continuing on the topic of repurposing 3D assets and such, for a more recent creature in the third season of The Mandalorian, there's this giant, essentially a kaiju, called a Trinitar, which I believe in a repeat of history, was repurposed from the Ankylosaurus model from Jurassic World.
Right.
It's hard to get a good single shot as there's none of the whole body, and I'll try to play the clip if YouTube's copyright system doesn't screw me over. But yeah, with this tail at least is definitely, based on Ankylosaurus, right? And
right.
Or some Ankylosaurids in general.
Right.
Right, because there's a whole group that doesn't have the club.
Exactly.
Right?
So the club-tailed ones, the Ankylosaurids, it's definitely seems to be inspired by that. And yeah, it's inspired by the media versions rather than the actual fossils, because it's got flexibility, as it does in the Jurassic World movies, all the way up to the knobby club at the end. When in fact, in the actual real-world Ankylosaurids, most of the tail length is rigid. The connections between the vertebrae are locking it together, so it's much more like, say, a battle axe with a heavy shaft, and then the big knob, the big club at the end for smacking the tails, smacking the legs or faces of tyrannosaurs, and also, probably even more often, smacking other Ankylosaurids in fights over dominance or whatever. But most media versions don't understand the rigidness, the rigidity of that tail, and so they give them more flexibility, and that seems to be going here. It sort of sweeps around, and then the tail mass, the tail club at the end, rather than something like a gigantic war club going by.
So yeah, you said it interlocks. There's like some ossified tendons or something.
Yeah, and then so in the projections off of the neural arch, the various apophyses, sort of grow into each other, lock it together. So it is a rigid handle, basically, before the club, and not the flexible tail that's often shown, for instance, in this particular monster.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I guess. I suppose in the scenario that I hypothesized, and that it was reused, like they probably, whatever the in animation we call the interior quote unquote skeletons rigs,
right?
Probably had what we call an IK rig, which sort of simulates anatomical limits, but because in general in animation there is no limit. There would be
right.
I mean, heck, even in Attack of the Clones, you can see the clone troopers' legs like phase into their chest, to their cod plates and whatever. But yeah, so I wonder if that's a transfer over from the inaccuracy in Jurassic World.
I suspect it is. I suspect, that they just imported that over, added a slightly different skin to it, and of course, increase the scale like 100-fold or more to make it gigantic size. But the software doesn't care. So yeah, you could make it as big or as small as you want on these images. So
right, yeah. So yeah, from here, some of the topics to be discussed I've gotten from an article by Kevin Binches that was up on the Star Wars website, but seems to have been taken down after they did a revamp of the site. But nonetheless, I'll post a link to the description in the description via the Internet Archive. So in another case of inspiration, there's the Dactillion from Revenge of the Sith, which at least I believe is clearly modeled on the Ornithocheirus from Walking with Dinosaurs, which you were involved in the development of.
That's right, yeah. And like the name Dactillion suggests, clearly inspired by pterodactyls and other pterosaurs. Now, the whole anatomy is extremely different. After all, this seems to be a hexapodal animal. It's got six limbs, 2 hind limbs, 2 arms, and 2 wings. Unlike real pterosaurs, where the wings are the arms. But the wings are clearly pterosaurian wings. They are not like bat wings with multiple fingers with a membrane between them, nor are they bird wings with feathers.
Right, because it's just the ring finger.
It's just the ring finger as the wing finger, which is what we see in pterosaurs. And it's got the long snout, as in Ornithocheirus, or at least the Ornithocheirus we had in Walking with Dinosaurs. Now, the actual pterosaur, Ornithocheirus, is poorly known, and in terms of its anatomy, it's an English form, although we have evidence of it or very similar forms elsewhere in Europe. And when Walking with Dinosaurs was being made, some of our pterosaur experts were saying it is close to, if not the same thing as Tropianathus, which is a giant pterosaur from Brazil. And that actually became part of the story, where we had one actually crossing transatlantically. So it goes from Brazil actually up along the eastern part of North America over to Europe, and then, well, it doesn't come back. It's a sad story. Oh, no, we're still not over it. It's the 90s. And
Thank you for reactivating my childhood trauma.
Exactly. Poor old guy. But, and so they gave it really the anatomy of Tropianathus, but called it Ornithocheirus, and that's what most people outside the pterosaur community would know it as, because prior to Walking with Dinosaurs, most pterosaurs you would see in dinosaur movies and so forth would have been Pteranodon, most common, with a long crest on the back of its head. You might see Rhamphorhynchus, although normally much bigger than it would be, with its little prow-shaped snout and the really long fish catch teeth. Maybe Dimorphodon with its deeper skull, and maybe once in a while you might actually see Pterodactylus with its longish teeth and restored with no crests, because we didn't know it had crests at the time, soft tissue crests. So Ornithocheirus was, for many people, one of their first introductions to a pterosaur that wasn't one of that batch. Right. So one could see why people might begin to pick up on it. Much like Liopleurodon has sort of the same role in terms of plesiosaurs, that most people prior to that would know about things like Elasmosaurus and Plesiosaurus if they knew about marine reptiles of the Mesozoic, but they didn't know the big-headed, short-necked ones. And then, eventually we got Liopleurodon in the forest, giving Charlie the Unicorn secrets. And if it weren't for Walking with Dinosaurs, the general public would never have heard of Liopleurodon, or in this case, Ornithocheirus.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. Because even the color scheme, like it's got the exact, the somewhat counter shaded and like the tan beak, and
right.
Well, actually, now that I look at it, it's got like a horizontal pupil, which
that's kind of weird. Yeah,
that wouldn't. Yeah, you don't generally see that in flying animals, do you?
No. Flying animals typically have nice round pupils if they're sight based, which other than bats, most flying animals are. Simply because that's the most efficient way of getting a lot of photons into your eye, and you want to be able to see where you're going.
Fantastic.
So that's a critical feature. So that having a slit eye, and especially a horizontal slit, which we associate more with sort of smaller to mid-sized herbivorous mammals today. Maybe a couple of the larger ungulates occasionally will get that. Right. But we don't normally think of the horizontal slit eye in terms of flyers or very large animals and so forth.
Right. Because then again, I suppose there are always exceptions to every rule.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Vertical slits are usually like low to the ground predators,
right?
Like snakes and whatever. But, I will post a picture of my chinchilla on here for example of a exception to the rule. Mm-hmm. Very much not predatory.
Yep.
Except to my fingers.
There we go. Yeah.
Let's see. Switching away from Mesozoic animals for a moment, there is the Reek from Attack of the Clones, which has great resemblance to an animal called Placerias.
Right. Yeah. So Placerias, and again, not coincidentally featured in Walking with Dinosaurs, so it might have been fresh in the minds of people who might be inspired by this while creating some of these things. Or at least it's a fairly one of the best known members of the group that's called the Dicynodonts. So the Dicynodonts are not dinosaurs. Not all ancient creatures are dinosaurs. Placerias, the Dicynodonts are proto-mammals. They're closer to mammals than they are to lizards and snakes and turtles and crocodiles and dinosaurs. And they have these burly bodies with really powerful shoulders, sort of stumpy tails, and as the name Dicynodon suggests they have 2 dog teeth, that is literally 2 canines, which become tusks.
Yeah.
And so in a real world Dicynodont, there are these typically downwards pointing tusks. But you can find a lot of art from like the 1960s and 70s of Placerias, where they gave it sort of more a forward sweeping tusks. And I don't really know why the justification was for that, because I've never seen fossils that show that. This seems to be inspired by that, but they've moved the tusks further back, so they're now horns on the back of the face, although they look like they're made of bone.
I guess they're projections of the cheek.
Yeah, like the cheek region. And then they've got a bunch of other teeth in this snarling snout. In actual Dicynodonts, those 2 cheek teeth, those 2 dog teeth, the 2 canines, that's all they got. Otherwise, they have a toothless beak. They're one of the first beaked herbivores in Earth history.
Oh, interesting. And
then they also don't have this big central horn coming up off the face that this monster does. But hey,
I guess they crossed it with a rhino.
Exactly, and it's a monster to be fought in an arena, so it's got to look big and scary. So.
Fair enough. Right. So then there's the Eopie, which Obi-Wan rides in the end of Revenge of the Sith. Well, actually, I suppose there's a particularly infamous scene in Attack of the Clones involving its flatulence.
Yes, that's true.
I believe that it's clearly based on an ungulate called Macrauchenia, right?
Yeah, and it certainly has Macrauchenia-like elements. So it appears to be, somewhat mammalian-like, although, those terms, you have to play with them fast and loose when you're dealing with the Star Wars universe, because it is an Earth. So these are independent origins of these things. But it is a quadruped. It has 3 toes in front and 3 toes in back. That's similar to Macrauchenia. The Macrauchenia is an example of what we call a South American native ungulate, which recent studies strongly suggest are close relatives of, but not actually members of, the Perissodactyla, which are the odd-toed ungulates today. So those are horses, tapirs, and rhinos, and they're extinct relatives. And Macrauchenia has sort of longish legs. It's sort of like the perissodactyl version of the camel. Camels are artiodactyls, which are the other major group of hoofed mammals. And in them, the weight is on the feet goes between these 2 fingers, whereas in perissodactyls, it's up through the middle finger. And that's what this animal shows. And Macrauchenia is also famous for having its nose opening, its nares, moved up to the center of its head. And since we find a similar shift in the position of the nares in trunked animals today, like elephant seals and tapirs, and then most famously in elephants, there's been speculation that Macrauchenia had a bit of a trunk, although the exact length of it isn't certain. Was it a little tapery thing? Was it longer? No one suggests it's like elephant length, but maybe longer than a tapirs and more like an elephant. And this animal, the Star Wars animal, actually does have a trunk. And so it may have been inspired by art of Macrauchenia that was either, from books or from something like Walking with Beasts that was around, around this time. So
right. Yeah, because actually, now that I think about it, you said because this is in the same grouping as the tapir. Would that have been a convergence, or would it have been an ancestral?
Right, it still would have been convergence because other forms in between, like horses, for instance,
they
don't have it. They would have all those hoofed mammals there do have sort of a flexible front of the upper lip, but it's only a couple different cases where it actually develops into something more substantial. The little trunk of a tapir, or over in the sea cows, they have a bit of a trunk there, and of course, famously, elephants, the really flexible, muscular, dexterous trunk that elephants use to do all sorts of things.
Right. Yeah, and this just completely came to mind. Do we know where because tapir, because they're they also have them in Southeast Asia.
That's right. Yeah.
Where would they have origin? The perissodactyls.
Perissodactyls. Well, probably there's a suggestion that possibly in India, and then they spread out from there after India docked with Asia. during the early Cenozoic. They are definitely found in many parts of the world by the late Paleocene and early Eocene. So we had Eohippus here in North America, so the very early representative of the horse lineage, Hyracotherium in Europe, which seems to be an early representative of a now extinct group called the Paleotheres. Rhinos originated in North America. There are diverse groups of tapirs around in various parts of the world. And in fact, the funny thing is we might think of the tapir, or at least one of the species of tapir, as being a traditionally South American animal, but they didn't get into South America until the last 3 million years or so, when the Isthmus of Panama finally opened up, or finally emerged from the water through the plate tectonics, and tapirs could come out of North America and migrate down there into the south, while we got porcupines coming to the north and other animals.
So they were part of the Great American Interchange.
So they're part of the Great American Biotic Interchange.
So
yep.
So there used to be tapirs here in North America.
Exactly. There used to be tapirs here in Maryland. There are fossils of tapirs from Maryland, from the not terribly distant geologic past. So,
how interesting. Okay, yeah, I went a little off track on that one, but that was for my brain. So finally, back to dinosaurs.
Right.
So in the Phantom Menace, it's pretty clear a lot of the visual design was taken from the illustrations in the Dinotopia book series by James Gurney. I mean, if you look at Naboo and the main city, and I will put these on screen right now. But and then the Gungans themselves seem to be at least somewhat based on old school depictions of the duck-billed dinosaurs, the hadrosaurs.
Right.
What in, I guess, most books in George Lucas's childhood would have called Trachodon.
Right.
Like, does what do we have to? Hold on, let me show an image. Because I mean, well, even the Gungan mounts, the Kadu,
right?
They have. Let me scroll. Yeah, I I mean, so pretty on the nose.
The Kadu, I think, even more so than the Gungans themselves, I think are definitely look to be inspired by hadrosaurs. Like, what would you do if you tried to turn a hadrosaur into a racer? With their big bills and so forth. The Gungans, they are a mix of various things. Maybe little hadrosaur elements here and there, but they're also sort of froggy. And, they've got those great big basset ears. Although, are they ears? Are they fins? What exactly are these projections? And the eyes that stick up. But the front of the snout of Gungans, that's really reminiscent of duckbill. So I could see that they were at least partially inspired by them.
Right. Yeah. Because especially older, like with that, because I guess they don't have proper beaks. They just
exactly.
Have lips,
yes. Very much more like the old depictions of duckbills, where they actually gave them duckbills before people appreciated how much of the keratinous beak was actually there, and it sort of could either square off the end of the snout, or sometimes even have these little projections going out from above and below, and give them a little more, the actual dinosaur having a little more sort of horsey face than ducky face. But if you just look at the bones, then they very much look very ducky. And these two Naboo native species, the intelligent Gungans and their steeds, look like the old-fashioned depictions of hadrosaurid snouts.
Right. Yeah, because and then I guess when my childhood was called an Titan and then an Anadosaur, they're all under Montosaurus now, right?
Right, exactly. Okay. So we now regard the batch of the broad-billed species of Saurolophine hadrosaurs from the end of the Cretaceous as being this genus Edmontosaurus, and that would encompass the dinosaurs that back in the old day, the mounted skeletons and the books and the toys that I grew up with would be calling Trachodon, although the actual teeth of Trachodon, that the name Trachodon was given to, are actually not the broad-billed duckbills, but rather the crested duckbills, although we don't know for certain which species of crested duckbill Trachodon belonged to, because it was just teeth.
The Lambeosaurians.
The Lambeosaurians, exactly.
Right. So, great segue.
Exactly, yeah.
Because actually next I have another hadrosaur-like alien, the Verk, of which we see Coleman Trebor, who does Genghis Fett's hand in Attack of the Clones. So yeah, what can we say about
Yes, so clearly an honorable and noble space dinosaur, because it is a Jedi. But yes, clearly inspired by Parasaurolophus. It's got the very tall crest going back, and in Parasaurolophus, the nasal passage goes up through the tube, up to the back, turning around and coming back downwards, in sort of a bassoon-like shape. Which was probably for both visual display, so it's very distinctive, but probably also sound generation.
Right? Yeah. Because I will actually play this when I do my editing, but it's my understanding we've managed to recreate the sounds.
Right. Yeah. So in fact, back in the 1970s and 80s, Dave Weisample, an expert on duckbills, created out of PVC a Parasaurolophus tube. So using the exact measurements of a large specimen, and he would blow through it and make a sound reminiscent in quality of a bassoon. And then later on, after we had CT scans and computer modeling of sound, another team tried to recreate it, and actually, it turned out Weisample's initial physical model wasn't terribly far off of what the digital model suggested, which is this deep bassoon-like sound, which is not a surprise given that the size and shape of the actual Parasaurolophus crest is sort of bassoon-shaped and bassoon-sized. So, and the thought is that these sounds could be very distinctive, each one, distinctive to each species, that they could call over long distances and send some sort of signal, whether it's a mating call or a distress call or a call to the children, whatever it might be.
Right. Yeah. Actually, something just came to my mind.
Right.
I've seen over they're used to depict them frequently with, I guess, be it fleshy webs or something.
Right.
What evidence do we have to point to whether there would be a connection at the back of the crest or not?
At present, we don't have a good line of evidence one way or the other. A Parasaurolophus skin impression would be really cool to see if there is something extending from that. There is evidence on many hadrosaurids that there is some sort of midline crest or fold or projections of scales, like rectangular scales coming up. So having midline orientation seems to be common, not just in the tube-crested or the helmet-crested Lambeosaurines, but in the flatter-headed Saurolophines. And even Edmontosaurus, the earlier species of Edmontosaurus at least, Edmontosaurus regalis, has a soft tissue crest on its head. We don't know about the later form, Anectens. So it is not unreasonable to think that there might have been a skin connection, some sort of webbing between the crest and the shoulder region of Parasaurolophus. We just don't have the direct physical evidence for it.
Right. So it's not entirely speculative, but it's
right.
But
it's exactly speculation inspired by the distinct possibility and the variation we see in other hadrosaurids.
Okay, interesting. Right. So finally, just some interesting panels from some comics. So if this would load, that would be fantastic. Right. So from the Star Wars Legacy comics, what does so
there we go. That's clearly a ceratopsid. In fact, it's clearly a centrosaurine ceratopsid, like Styracosaurus or one of its kin. So it's got the deeper snout, the shorter, deeper snout that we see in centrosaurines rather than Chasmosaurines like Triceratops. And
I've seen some others. I think they think that it's Achelousaurus.
It may well be, yes. So we don't actually have a nose horn as such, so we can't really say which one it is. And then it's got ornamentation along its frill, these epoccipitals that ceratopsids have, and specifically centrosaurines especially the group closest to Styracosaurus, Achelousaurus, and Pachyrhinosaurus, although some of the other ones too, like Lokiceratops, have rather pronounced projections coming off that frill in ways that the Chasmosaurian ceratopsids, so Triceratops and a Rhinoceratops and Torosaurus and company, do not. So it's not merely a horned dinosaur. It's not merely a ceratopsid. It is a centrosaurian ceratopsid.
Ah, great for the specification there.
Yep.
Somehow, well, I just noticed. I think it has an extra eye.
Well, yeah.
coming
So
out.
obviously, it's an alien. It's an alien. So yes, it does have an extra eye, and so forth. So, but yeah. Hey, it works.
Yeah. I guess the artist didn't want to be too on the nose.
Exactly.
And then from the Dawn of the Jedi comics are some type of Spinosaurids.
Oh yeah, so there we got Spinosaurids that are at least as accurate as the Baryonyx in one of the Jurassic World movies, which is not very. I still think they should have just called that a Megaraptor and then
would have been closer.
Yeah, it would have been closer in shape. And honest to goodness, we don't know as much about the anatomy of Megaraptorans, so you could get away with a lot more. But this is clearly inspired by something like Baryonyx, a Spinosaurid, but not one with the really big sail. And it's got rather powerful, 3-clawed hands, and it's got the 3-clawed feet. So yeah. Although these guys are glowing with, I don't know if it's the force or electricity or whatever.
Great question.
But which as far as we know, no, we can't. That actual Spinosaurids could not do. So yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, force Spinos.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's got the classic inaccuracy of the downward facing hand.
Yes. But maybe these space dinos, they actually could do that. They maybe not limited to being clappers, so they could be slappers.
Yeah. So for the audience, who those don't know, everybody you say, "Oh, I'm a Velociraptor." Yeah.
It's like no, I'm a Velociraptor. It's like this.
It's like this.
Like this. There you go. That's a Velociraptor. They could, if you want to do this to a Velociraptor, you pop its wrist out of its socket. And that's the reason they're always so angry on Jurassic Park. Every one of them is deformed. Not only are their wrists broken, but someone sliced their hands up so they split right down there all the way to the wrist. And that's going to make everyone's day bad. So no wonder they're always angry.
No wonder.
Yep.
And then, here's something I just, okay. So for the longest time, people have called there's the species of Dromaeosaurid called Microraptor,
right?
The living X-Wing,
right? Yeah.
Because it has 4 wings. Well, okay, it got 4 at least projections of the. I'm not sure if I'd call the legs wings.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, so I just learned this today actually, in the Resistance TV series. They made a drone version of the X-Wing called the Microraptor class.
Oh, okay, there we go. All right. Yeah, so since, there was this initial thought that Microraptor, it has its arms with the very long feathers, so those would be the normal wings, and then its legs also have very long feathers, and there were attempts to restore it where the legs were spread out to the side to generate lift. However, that's kind of difficult for a dinosaur leg to do. Dinosaurs aren't really good about rotating the legs out to the side the way we mammals do. They don't have the same sort of ball and socket or the spherical head of the femur in the hip socket the way that we mammals do. So probably they kept more vertically oriented, maybe a little side to side. And their aerodynamic function may have been a little bit more having to do with steering than with generating lift.
Right, because they were gliders,
they probably have gliders, some aerial ability, but not real powered flyers. But it's nice to see that Microraptor gets representation, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
That particular group has always been of great fascination to me. The last part of my online alias is Raptor. But
there we go. Oh, and I just thought about this. So it's appropriate that Microraptor class is an X-Wing drone, since Microraptor was named and first described by Zhu Jing, who's got 2 X's in his name. So you got X-Wing named after one of Dr. X's dinosaurs. So
that's a fantastic point.
Yeah.
Right, because I mean, yeah, I'll the small Dromaeosaurus. I mean, even actually, I will put on screen a sculpture I did of one.
Oh, there you
go. So even though they couldn't spread their legs very far, it still would have assisted with some sort of gliding mechanism.
Yeah, among all the non-bird dinosaurs, Microraptor is one that probably had the best aerial locomotion. It's as the name suggests, not a big animal. It's got very large wing surface areas compared to its body size. And then, of course, the tail is, in a sense, the fifth wing because it's got the feathers sticking off the back of the tail. So it probably had better aerial locomotion than most of its cousins, but could probably, to a certain degree, convergent with that of birds. You started with feathered animals, maybe very limited aerial locomotion, and then it got better independently in Microraptor and in the line going directly up to birds.
Right. So, yeah, well, so on our final point.
Right.
Finally, there's in expanded universe media, there's a handful of sentient, or rather sapient, but in the Star Wars terminology they use sentient, quote unquote raptor species in the galaxy far, far away. And so here are the rather silly Siruvi and Tishar.
Oh, okay, yeah. So very, very scaly, old school style raptors, not the feathery ones that we would understand in our modern world, but probably the creators of these more inspired by the portrayal in Jurassic Park than by our understanding in the dinosaur world.
I think I said, come on, artist, but I'm pretty sure this one is just traced off. Of a frame from, I want to say Jurassic Park 3.
I think so too. Yeah, it looks a lot like that.
It's like, come on, I mean, better than doing AI art. So I suppose.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly.
But still. So these clearly based on the outdated 80s, 90s depiction of Maniraptorans. So, well, you were pointing out with feathers. What do we have to say about the depiction of how they've changed over time?
Sure. Yeah. So we go from the initial scaly interpretation of raptors, because even when we recognize that dromaeosaurs were closer, which is technically for raptors, closer to birds than they are to other carnivorous dinosaurs, there's still some question as to when feathers originated. And artists like Greg Paul and scientists like Bob Bacher, although to be fair, Greg Paul also publishes science, and Bob Bacher was also a very talented artist. Right. In the late 70s, they were beginning to portray feathered versions of dromaeosaurs. And some people were saying, this is ridiculous, pure speculation. And it turns out what they were doing back then was so beyond conservative to what we now understand. Yeah. They had like barely any feathers on them. Whereas now we know that dromaeosaurs were as feathered as a bald eagle or a chicken. That true modern pennaceous feathers evolved far before the common ancestor of dromaeosaurs and birds, and that all the dinosaurs in that part of the family tree would have been fully feathered animals. And so the people who are inspired more by the Jurassic Park movies than they are by paleontology, when they do their raptor-inspired dinosaurs, they have scaly animals that happen to be sort of smallish bodies with the heads almost straight from Jurassic Park raptors rather than the actual anatomy. And they give them the hands with the sliced up, the broken wrists and the sliced up hands, rather than the actual birdy sort of animals with big, sharp, nasty teeth that real dromaeosaurs were, and that actually might make for more interesting aliens.
I definitely second that. Mm-hmm. And in the case of sapiens, mm-hmm. So you have anything to say about the hypothetical dinosauroid model?
Yes.
Right.
So back in the late 70s, early 80s, Dale Russell and an artist friend of his, so Dale Russell was a paleontologist, tried to have inspired by what was called Stenonychosaurus at the time, but it's Troodon. What would happen if Troodon had not gone extinct, but survived, and since it was already the most brainy of the Mesozoic dinosaurs, what would happen if it attained mammalian, or in fact specifically hominid level of intelligence? And Dale and his Dale Russell and his artist friend, I think, were a little too heavily inspired by humans, and so the creature, the Dinosauroid they created, is, I think, far more humanoid than it needs to be. It's got a fully upright posture, whereas there's no reason to think it would need that. Yes, it would have a bigger brain and therefore a heavier head than a normal Troodont, but Pachycephalosaurs, which would have a much more massive head because it's bone, it's not brain, they remained, horizontal posture, and then the neck would just swoop up with the skull on top of it. So no reason you couldn't do that. No reason to really shorten up that face. Similarly, in Pachycephalosaurus, the back of the skull becomes huge and rounded. Again, not for brain, but for the dome. And yet they still have they have the longest snouts of any of the Pachycephalosaurs. So no reason that a Troodont, if the back of its skull swelled up for a big brain, would have to have its face shrink up to make it look more like a human. And no reason to lose the tail if you're not going, to a totally upright posture. Most of the muscles that power the hind legs in dinosaurs are attached to the thigh. Although, to be fair, as a raptor dinosaur, as a part of the Deinonychosauria, Troodonts would have a lot of power at the knee as well. So they don't need to have super long tails. But I think it'd be more likely if it would have a longish tail. And what was not known when they created the Dinosauroid, but which we now know now, is that Troodonts would be fully feathered animals, and so a real Dinosauroid, if you can say a real Dinosauroid, a Dinosauroid inspired by what we now know about paleontology, would almost certainly be a feathered animal.
Right, because then of course there's the SpecEvo project by C.M. Kozeman,
right,
who you in the audience might know from creating All Tomorrows, who did a fantastic, more plausible series of concepts of what, a more plausible...
exactly, yeah. So that's much more reasonable.
Avisapiens, I think.
Right. And in fact, one could go even further. We know in the modern world what highly intelligent dinosaurs look like, because we have them. And these would be the corvids, the crow family, and the Psittacoforms, the parrot group, both of which extraordinarily intelligent. I mean, among the birds, the ones that are getting closest to, if not up into, sort of primate level intelligence. And they're bird-shaped. And they're not exactly the same shape as each other. No one would really confuse a raven and a macaw. So it shows that you could have big brains, complex cognition, and even tool use to a certain degree, this case manipulating beaks, in animals which are shaped nothing like a human being. And there's no reason to think that a different sort of dinosaur, that in this case Troodonts, would have to go into a human-like shape in order to be a tool-using intelligent creature.
Right. Like one of my biggest pet peeves in sci-fi is just making everything human. Like, okay, of course, in Star Trek, whatever, there are budget concerns,
exactly,
whatever, blah, blah, blah. But, it's unfortunate that so much, I guess, creativity is stifled by the idea that, no, if you're intelligent, you have to be humanoid, which is not the case.
Absolutely not the case. Yeah, there's many different ways to be intelligent, even on this planet. Like, as I mentioned, the primate pattern is one. Elephants, highly intelligent creatures, very different shape than us. Similarly, dolphins. Similarly, octopods. As I said, ravens, corvids. Octopodes, octopi.
I've always wondered.
Yeah, octopoda is actually the technical group that they belong to. So the octopod is sort of a safe term because you don't know they're saying that's the genus Octopus. It could be any of them.
Right.
And yes, there's lots of different ways that we see intelligence, not human level, but elevated above their closer cousins. and have nothing to do with a human-like shape.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then that was a funny illustration in a spacesuit.
Oh, there we go. Absolutely. Yeah.
On screen. But yeah. Alrighty. Well, is there anything else you would like to say to the audience in regards to?
Yeah. So with the creativity going on with all these various Star Wars projects and and other franchises as well, it's good to see that people are finding inspiration from the fossil world. This is the current batch of living creatures is just a tiny fraction of what's lived in our history, and so yes, you can draw upon those, and we could draw upon myth. But drawing upon the fossil world is also really cool, and it's going to be interesting to see what people come up with in the future.
That fantastic point, because I in my experience in the fan base, everybody's got their like niche of what they're an expert in, be it starships, be it can quote every single line of the film, whatever. And some people say it's the creatures, but people who know me, they're like, wow, how come you're not so obsessed with the creatures in Star Wars? It's like, well, because there are real ones who are way more interesting.
That's very true. Yeah.
So, anyway, so I will put Dr. Holtz's social media in the description. And thank you for agreeing to be on here.
Sure.
And thank you, viewers, for watching. And may the force be with you always.
Take care.